What is canon? A dictionary would tell you it's a general rule or principle, or a collection of sacred works. But nerds, geeks, and other internet dwellers may have a different definition. When viewing fiction as a sum of works, canon is the events you count, the ones that happened, the ones that actually matter. Anyone can contribute non-canon material to a story, but the creator's original framework will almost always hold more weight. 2006 saw the release of Superman Returns, a sequel to 1980's Superman 2. However, there were already 2 sequels and a spin-off released in the intervening period. Returns disregards them entirely, contradicting previously established events. The film's rendition of Superman later appears in an adaptation of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and confirms that the first 2 films and Returns happened, but not the first 5. Armed with canon, authors can always just move the goalpost to rewrite the inconvenient bits. But nowadays, as creators find new and inventive ways to tell stories, and the distance between them and their fans shrinks, the waters of canon start to get a bit muddy. Elements of stories are added or removed haphazardly. Fan perception influences the plot. Licenses are handed down to new successors. Some of the biggest franchises start to collapse under their own weight, as elements are added or removed at the whims of corporations. A movie that didn't do so well is part of the story one year, and the next, we pretend it never happened. Opposing these giants are creators who come from the bottom up, former fans themselves, whose indie hits look eye to eye with fandom, rather than looking down on us. Now, I know it might seem like a load of horse shit.
Oh my god, who the hell cares?
And trust me, it feels that way, regurgitating all these buzzwords. But for decades, establishing what is and isn't canon has been the battleground upon which many a flame war have been waged. In 2019, my favorite story received not 1, but 2 follow-ups. I've talked about Homestuck on this channel before, and I'm sure that my editor is groaning that I'm mentioning it again. But don't worry if you're unfamiliar. For today, I'm not looking at the content of the story, rather a unique approach these follow-ups took to canonicity. By declaring them as post-canon, they attempted to straddle the line between official sequel and fanfiction. The goal was to empower the fanbase to make their own continuations, democratizing the process of storytelling. Despite the best of intentions, it ultimately failed to resonate with the audience. I was there to watch it unfold live, and though it hasn't been remembered fondly, I think it posed an interesting question that will become more relevant as time goes on. What does canon look like when the fans are given the liberty to define it? Can a story flourish without concrete barriers to hold it in place? Or is it those strict rules and boundaries that make a story better, more understandable? Note that I will be talking at length about multiple different works that this applies to. This isn't a Homestuck video, but it was the Epilogues and Beyond canon that inspired me to write it. I'll also walk us through a brief history of canon, from its religious origins to modern internet usage. Let's get into it. Before use in fiction, canon was a term ascribed to religious text. The word canon itself comes from the Greek word kanon, which originally meant a straight rod by which architects measured their work, essentially the standard by which things are judged. Priests and prophets inspired their followers to etch their gospel in stone, but over time, discrepancies arose between writers as they gave conflicting accounts of religious teachings. Consensus was needed for a religion to become organized. Modern holy books are often whatever writing survived and meshed well together. The Torah, the Quran, the Bible, the Pali Canon, the Vedas, etc. In the Western world, the word canon originated at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, in which the Romans forced Christians to unionize and decide just what it was that they believed in. From this point onward, canon referred to Catholic law. Then, around the 19th century, people began to discuss a literary canon, a set of the alleged best and most essential writings in history. The idea is attributed to poet Matthew Arnold, who, being an Englishman, viewed the best of the best as exclusively belonging to the Western world. Today, the Western canon still exists, but is ever-changing and a topic of hot debate. Think of it as all those books and poems that you were forced to read in school, because the teacher said they were classics. The Great Gatsby, huh? More like The Great Gatsby. Arthur Conan Doyle's 1887 story, A Study in Scarlet, introduced the world to Sherlock Holmes, who's kind of like Columbo if he was boring. Doyle's work was met with critical acclaim, and he began to release more works with Sherlock, accumulating a total of 56 short stories and 4 novels before his death in 1930. However, even before Doyle's death, other writers began publishing their own stories featuring the character. And it wasn't just amateurs. Parodies and derivatives written by Doyle's peers, like J.M. Barrie, Mark Twain, Maurice Leblanc, and others. To clear up confusion among readers, Doyle's originals were defined as canon, setting a standard for discussion. The term canon showed up in this context around the 1920s, when Ronald Knox began to write critical essays of the series. Since Doyle's death, his estate has actually authorized official sequels, but whether or not they're accepted by longtime fans is a different story entirely. It's difficult to pinpoint the true origins of fandom and fanfiction. In layman's terms, fandom is a subculture dedicated to a particular media, usually fictional, and fanfiction is work derived from pre-existing media by another creator. Before copyright law became widely established, plenty of stories featured elements or characters from earlier works. Dante's Inferno and Paradise Lost are classical pieces based on elements of the Bible. Alonso Fernandez de Avellaneda wrote a sequel to Don Quixote before its original author could. Gulliver's Travels inspired dozens of works, including a piece of art by William Hogarth, in which Gulliver receives an enema from the Lilliputians. The late 1800s saw the rise of subcultures dedicated to Sherlock Holmes, as well as author Jane Austen, the latter dubbed Janeites. The rise of mass media in the early 1900s, films, newspapers, radio, saw fiction exposed to larger audiences, creating fertile ground for fandom to grow. Science fiction was most prominent, sparking clubs, conventions, and dedicated magazines. H.G. Wells' novels around the turn of the century helped to pioneer an interest in the future. Isaac Asimov got his start and wrote some of his most influential work as short stories, distributed in popular magazines like Amazing Stories and Future Fiction. The true genesis of modern fandom, however, is attributed to 1966's Star Trek and the franchise that followed it. In just a year, the series got its own fanzine, kind of like a magazine, but assembled by fans out of fan art, fan fiction, and other various writings. Before the advent of the internet, mass production of these zines allowed members of the community to share their works with other members. It's notable that despite the male-centric image often associated with nerdy fandoms, it's estimated that by 1973, 90% of Trekkie fanfic authors were female. While certainly dated, the show had women in leadership roles on the Enterprise, and several female creators behind the scenes. Hand in hand with modern fandom comes shipping, and those early Trekkies created one of the most legendary gay ships of all time, Kirk/Spock. The term slash has historically been used for same-sex ships in fanfiction. It originates here, in fanfiction about the captain and his second-in-command. Stories featuring the two of them in a romantic relationship would be included and distributed in fanzines, blazing a trail for generations of fujoshis. Another growing trend of fanfiction took place in Japan around the 70s and 80s. Doujinshi are self-published print works that allow for ease of creation by independent authors. They originated in the 1800s, but the advent of photocopying allowed much easier mass production of printed works. What followed was a renaissance of doujins, allowing distribution of parody and love stories between pre-established characters.
We'll return after these messages.
Do you like watching Rav Sucks? Of course you do, silly. It's why you're here. But do you really like Rav Sucks? Would you say you can't get enough of it? Would you, theoretically, be willing to fork over your hard-earned cash in its name? That's right, you can now pay real money for a free experience with the advent of the Rav Sucks Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can rest easy with the knowledge that you've contributed to the channel. The Goober tier is an inexpensive package that lets you brag to all your friends about how much you love your favorite YouTuber. But the Penguin tier gives you all this and more. Get access to behind-the-scenes footage. That's definitely not notes written in chicken scratch. If you love what we do and want to make sure that we can keep doing more of it, consider subscribing today to the Rav Sucks Patreon. And if you don't want to do that, you can still catch updates as part of the coveted free tier.
Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Where zines laid the foundation, the internet built to dizzying heights. Anyone could create on the World Wide Web, so long as they could afford a computer and connection. People began to flock to online hubs to build communities, as a way to connect with anyone across the globe. Fanfiction.net was registered in 1998 by software developer Jing Li, and within 3 years, 100,000 stories were posted. Within 4, 118,000 accounts were created. And like with Star Trek, women led the charge, with an 80% user base by 2002. By the end of 2019, an estimated 60 billion words worth of content had been written. It didn't take long for more hubs of fan content to emerge. You may be familiar. Archive of Our Own, Wattpad, and DeviantArt, to name a few. Social media, from Twitter to Tumblr, bursting at the seams with new art every day. It was a snowball effect, because all this discussion, art, and writing draws the attention of the uninitiated, exposing them to media they might have never heard of otherwise. It's also a testament to the effect that these stories have on people, how inspiring fiction can be. As with doujins, all it took was the opportunity. There's many cases where creators of fanfiction and fan art went on to create great works of their own. Naomi Novik is a published author of several series who helped found AO3. Cassandra Clare, writer of The Mortal Instruments, got her start writing Harry Potter fanfic. Infamously, the 50 Shades of Grey series was repurposed from the author's original Twilight smut. Oh, are you not familiar with the term smut? You see, the internet fandom boom has led to the creation and proliferation of a lot of jargon, slang that comes naturally to the terminally online and is indecipherable to your grandparents. Smut is one such instance, though the word goes back centuries, originally meaning flakes of dirt or soot from steam engines. It came to refer to pornography in Victorian England. It kept this definition over time before being adopted as shorthand for NSFW fanfiction. The anonymity of the internet meant that people could be free to indulge their freakier sides without being judged by their peers. Fanon refers to elements of a story invented by fans, but widely held to be true in fandom subculture. Oftentimes, these are ideas that are neither proven nor disproven in the context of the story. If it adds depth to a character, or explains a plot hole, it doesn't hurt to believe it. For example, many fans of the Godzilla movies spread the idea that each head of Ghidorah, the three-headed alien invader, had its own personality. Sure enough, in 2019's Godzilla, King of the Monsters, the creators incorporated this idea. Harry Potter fans assumed for the longest time that the snake Harry talks to in Philosopher's Stone was Nagini, Voldemort's pet. Among fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Azula's interactions with Ty Lee were read as either bisexual or lesbian subtext, something confirmed by her voice actress. One level deeper, headcanons refer to pieces of fanon specific to individual people, something you believe is true, regardless of whether canon or not. There may be some overlap with fanon, but conflicts with the original source material are much more likely to dissuade commonly held opinions. That doesn't faze everyone, though. Some people will draw and write characters as they wish them to be, even if they have to contradict what's established. As online communities have often been a space for LGBT people to connect and explore their identities safely, a lot of headcanons tend to be about gender identity and sexual orientation. If you see yourself in a character, it's understandable to wonder if they feel the same way as you do. With practically everyone online nowadays, it's usually only a matter of time before creators become aware of their fanbase. Some creators don't want anything to do with their fans, while others love to see it. The more sociable creators will listen to the theories and ideas that their fans cook up, and even sometimes confirm or incorporate them into the story. Madeline, the main character of Celeste, was confirmed by the game's creators to be trans after much debate in the fandom. It was a long road to get there, but at the very end of Adventure Time, after years of subtext, support from the cast, and pleading from the fanbase, Princess Bubblegum and Marceline were made a canon pairing. However, adding or changing story elements on the fly like this can have its downsides. Butch Hartman claimed that none of the ghosts on Danny Phantom are spirits of the dead, and are instead aliens who think they used to be humans. Referred to as a retcon, it's a direct change made retroactively by a creator, meaning that you just kind of ignore what's actually there. Several episodes imply or directly state that a ghost used to be human. We see flashbacks to the life of Desiree. We are told that the Dairy King haunts his old home. We're shown that Poindexter was a student in the 1950s. There's numerous examples that contradict this statement, and I never even watched the show. The alien explanation doesn't hold up to a simple Google search, which means it's hard to take seriously, even if it's supposed to be canon. Last but not least, discontinuity occurs when an element or entry of a franchise is ignored outright, whether by canon or fanon. Maybe the final season of a show is so bad that fans pretend it didn't happen. A creator may not be satisfied with the way they left things and come back for a do-over. Legal issues or corporate decisions may jettison parts of stories that they don't feel are worth the hassle. The Star Wars Expanded Universe once consisted of hundreds of books and games detailing centuries of history beyond the movies. However, when Disney acquired the rights to the franchise, they decided that the complicated lore made it near impossible to produce movies for a casual audience. So, they stripped everything but the ground floor and boxed it all off, never to touch their perfect product ever again. Now that we have an idea of what both canon and fandom really mean, let's take a look at some works that warp canonicity, leaving it up to the fanbase to decide their own truth. If the creators have the answers, they're choosing to keep them close to their chest, wanting to see what others can come up with. Or perhaps there are no answers, and the story is simply what you make of it. What it means to you is more important than whatever the author intended. If this sounds familiar, I'm paraphrasing a concept coined by Roland Barthes in his famous essay, The Death of the Author. It suggests that the author's intentions in writing a text should hold no more weight than the conclusions drawn by the reader. If I write that the curtain is blue just because, it doesn't invalidate your idea that the blue symbolizes sadness. If you take something away from media that the author never considered, what's important is that it meant something to you. Which isn't to say that there's no objective right or wrong. Don't go all Manson and assume the Beatles want you to start a race war, but, you know, find a happy medium. Whether or not these authors intended to invoke Dota is unclear, but it seems they're happy to let fans contribute and draw their own interpretations. The first we'll discuss is a popular YouTube analog horror series, Petscop. It follows Paul, a YouTuber posting footage of the titular game, a PS1 title that went mysteriously unreleased. As he progresses through the world of the game, he discovers hidden rooms, secrets, and other players. It seems like pretty standard stuff for the genre, a seemingly innocuous video game that not only hides disturbing imagery, but ties to a real-world tragedy. It's the delivery and mystery, though, that really draws me in. The voice acting isn't professional. Paul really sounds like some random dude on the internet, trying to 100% a game. He's awkward, goes long periods without talking, sniffles, but that's what makes it authentic. The music, graphics, and design are all carefully crafted. Even if it plays a lot of cliches straight, it does them well. Episodes can appear out of chronological order, and the point of view shifts between multiple playthroughs and recordings of the game. The end result is a labyrinth of a story that leaves the viewer with more questions than answers. How are Paul and Care related? What happened to Lena? Are the events of the last few episodes happening in the present or a representation of the past? I scoured social media, wikis, comment sections, looking for an explanation to what I had just seen, but nothing was truly satisfying. I can't remember the conclusion I came to, but eventually I had to start making assumptions, interpreting it in my own way. There was no true answer that solved everything. You do get a happy ending, some closure, but you don't know what it's closure for. It drove me crazy at first, but nowadays, I think it's why the series still means so much to me. I could rewatch it right now and come to an entirely different set of conclusions, while still feeling lost. The creator, Tony Domenico, said this about the mystery in an interview. "I like stuff that leaves a lot of room for the imagination. The way I thought about it was, I'm only showing a slice of things. I hope to get across a feeling like there's a lot more here, something strange and complex happening in the background, and you just aren't getting a full view of it." Elsewhere on the internet, October 2020 saw the Ludum Dare 47 Game Jam, a competition where developers would quickly create video games and pit them against each other. One such entry, created by Ninja Muffin 99, Evil Skater, Phantom Arcade, and Kawaii Sprite, was Friday Night Funkin', a rhythm game reminiscent of Parappa the Rapper. You play as Boyfriend, rapping against various characters, usually to impress his girlfriend. The entry was a massive success, with many pleading for an expansion into a full game. The team behind it got to work, dropping a string of updates that only served to rile up the fandom even more. However, the updates eventually stopped, as the team prepared a Kickstarter for a full-scale release. As of this video, they're still working on it, so it's been a while. In the meantime, the community exploded with fan-made levels and characters. The premise of the game, Boyfriend rapping against whoever stepped up to the mic, meant it was very easy to write in whoever. Spend 2 minutes on a script, get some songs put together, draw your OC in a couple of poses, and map out the notes. Bam! Friday Night Funkin' mod complete. The team behind the game were Newgrounds veterans, so they were used to interacting with other indie creators. The tone of the game isn't very serious, so the developers aren't too strict about throwing in ideas. Many elements of the lore have been confirmed through live streams and tweets. For example, Ninja Muffin 99 claimed that Pico and Boyfriend had previously dated as a joke. The fandom ran with this, with a surge of fan art, fan fiction, and mods. Seeing the outpour of attention, he went back and confirmed it to be canon.
Pico and BF are canonically exes, that is real.
Due to their shared cyan hair, fans joked that Boyfriend and Hatsune Miku were related, an idea approved by the creators. Fan names for Boyfriend and pieces of fan art were referenced by in-game flavor text, added in later updates. And where they don't incorporate fanon outright, they acknowledge and support the contributions of mod creators. Developers frequently discuss, praise, repost, and even draw art of fan characters. A ton of mod footage was included in the official trailer, and the full game is planned to have a custom song and character sharing network to allow people to create custom levels and share them in-game. They've also alluded to collaborating with artists on cameos and playable characters. The laissez-faire approach to lore and full-scale embrace of the fandom doesn't point exactly to Dota, but it makes the community-created content feel just as important as the main game. I looked up the game on YouTube, and the first thing I see are mods. So many mods. Maybe things will change when the full game releases, but in the meantime, FNF is the Wild West, where anyone can contribute, and the developers seem happy to keep it that way.
We'll return after these messages.
No one should have to spend their days in fear, especially not children. Today, I ask for your help and attention for Operation Olive Branch, a grassroots movement to collect aid for Palestinian families in need. Whether it's for food, clean water, medical aid, or safe passage, donating or spreading the word can be what saves a life today. There's also several projects you can support specifically, from building schools to buying formula for young children in Gaza. Just a few minutes of your time can make a difference. I've told this story twice now, so I'll try to keep it brief. Homestuck is a webcomic that ran from 2009 to 2016, about a video game that ends the world and transports its players into a new one. Their purpose is to create a new universe in which the cycle can begin anew. So has the multiverse propagated itself for time immemorial. Homestuck was beloved for its characters, world building, humor, and notable LGBT representation. Unlike other forms of media, webcomics show the creation of the work in real time, page by page. When watching TV or reading comics, each episode or issue has a beginning, middle, and end, and can usually be watched as a standalone story. But Homestuck didn't promise structure or serialization. It could update on any given day, with anywhere from 1 to 66 pages of new content. There could be days or even weeks with no updates in sight. This created a fandom constantly fiending for the next update, picking apart individual pages and dialogue, theorizing about what it could mean. The cry of "update" rang through the halls of Tumblr, causing people to swarm the site en masse, wanting to see what had changed. Some updates, like the end of Act 5, created such a stir that they crashed Newgrounds. While they've since retired from the public eye, the comic's creator, Andrew Hussie, was once active on social media and engaged with fans pretty frequently. He answered questions on Formspring, sometimes seriously, sometimes sarcastically, but he paid attention to the ideas that fans were coming up with. Fandom inside jokes would be referenced in dialogue, character headcanons would be incorporated into their designs, and elements of the story would be inspired by fan theories. This back and forth between the comic and its fandom only added to its popularity. Its growth, however, is ultimately what killed it. A Kickstarter was posted in 2012, at Homestuck's peak, for a spin-off adventure game. Out of the $700,000 goal, $2.5 million was raised in no time, and work began on the project. This divided Hussie's attention between game and comic, especially when development led to scandals and logistical issues. As a result, the update schedule suffered, and hiatuses went from days to weeks to years. Without a steady string of updates, fans lost interest, and the comic's popularity never recovered. On April 13th, 2016, Homestuck finally came to a close, but not without a few final words. An epilogue was promised, though no release date was given. The ending mostly wrapped things up, but left some critical plot points either unexplained or resolved off-screen. Flash forward 3 years, on April 13th, 2019, the first chapter of the Homestuck Epilogues was released, followed by the rest of it the next week. Out of nowhere, a 200,000-word book dropped online and hit the fandom like a bullet through a windshield. For starters, the first page was a parody of AO3, with a massive list of trigger warnings many took as a joke. To their surprise and horror, they were all true, as the epilogues fully leaned into an 18 and up rating. To make matters worse, it was responsible for many jarring and upsetting changes to beloved characters, who had spent 7 years growing up in the story's absence. Suffice to say, people hated it, and many were quick to disregard it entirely. I actually quite liked them, but that's a story for another day. Hussie released the epilogues with the label of dubiously canon. Rather than treating it like an official continuation, they phrased it as something you could choose to be canon. The story delves heavily into metafiction, with certain characters realizing both that they're in a story and that the story is coming to an end. Leaving it on a cliffhanger, Hussie's intent, as stated in an interview, was to leave the fandom angry and unsatisfied, to let them take the reins so that they could do better, write their own endings, either pick up the story where he left off, or disregard the epilogues entirely and make your own. This could have made for a thought-provoking note to end off on, and I was satisfied with it. But lo and behold, a mere 6 months later, and Homestuck Squared, Beyond Canon, drops online. Enough was not enough, and a new team, commissioned and guided by Hussey, picked up the reins to the story. No longer just text, it was a whole new comic, an entire sequel rather than an epilogue. And hey, the art looked good, they dropped a whole bunch of pages at once, and even allowed user-submitted suggestions. The team was adamant that it was a post-canon story, only one possible interpretation of where the story went after the original comic. As the website itself said, whether this means the content should qualify as canon to the same extent as preceding material is something for you to reflect on as you read it. Despite my initial skepticism, I was interested to see where the team took this. The creators directly said that the story would rely on the input of fans, expand into spaces governed by fandom desire. Hussey was passing the torch to those who loved the story, so that they could decide its direction. Whether that meant that Homestuck Squared was just one option among a plethora of other fanfiction, or that fans could help steer the direction of the story. It was ambitious, bold, and experimental. However, there were a few foundational problems. The story wasn't written by Hussey, but it followed their direction. He had already written an outline that the team would follow, and would consult them on decisions. Being produced by the official creator doesn't make it look like another fan work, and most people just saw it as a normal sequel. It also came right off the heels of the epilogues, an intentionally divisive story that pissed people off rather than inspiring them. Fans were going and writing their own fanfiction, but not because they were contributing to Hussey's new fanontinuum. They just didn't care anymore. Perhaps if the new team had started before the backlash, things might have worked out. But when they made their grand debut, and opened a suggestion box to talk directly with the fans, the most commonly submitted response was, "Stop making Homestuck." Yikes. Despite a rocky start, the comic was underway with one update per month. During the original comic's heyday, Homestuck was updated at a breakneck pace. Hussey's work ethic was impressive, but unrealistic, and set a standard that the new team couldn't keep up with. The story could only move so fast, with around 25 pages a month, especially when there were so many plot lines to focus on. By the time a year had passed, the story had hardly advanced. There was also the issue of paywalls. The team had bills and rent to pay, and so relied on Patreon for support. To entice fans, an increased update schedule was promised if the Patreon hit 2,000 subscribers. After a while, it eventually reached this milestone, and the comic bumped up to 2 updates a month. However, over time, the number of pages in each update started to decrease, which made people feel like they were being cheated. All this to say, tensions were rising. So few fans had stuck around, and the ones that were left began to lose interest. But Beyond Canon's troubles weren't over yet. Hussey decided in late 2019 to post a cryptic series of images on Instagram. Toblerone candy bars were signed by the author and hidden in various locations: Point Lobos, California, Aimei Tea House in Taiwan, and Banpo Hangang Park, South Korea. Whoever found one of these candy bars was allowed to make a wish, a permanent change to the canon of Homestuck. The first wish made was to have the main character, John Egbert, be a trans woman. Hussey said the wish was granted and did not elaborate. Hilarity ensued. Debates broke out over whether John was now a woman and must be referred to as one, or if it would happen later on in the story. No one seemed willing to clarify, and pretty soon, more wishes began to be made as the Toblerones were found. This wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back, but very much representative of the chaos that surrounded Beyond Canon. The comic would continue to feature drastic character changes from the epilogues, and introduce new twists that were poorly received. Fans constantly criticized the new team, ranging from genuine concerns to actual racism and transphobia, already under a lot of pressure. And with dwindling financial support from the Patreon, some team members started to lash out at the fandom, only digging themselves deeper. Eventually, it was too much to take, and the project collapsed, entering an indefinite hiatus after 2020. In retrospect, I don't think that the team deserved all the hate they received. I think it was far too ambitious a project, and that they took on very high expectations. Homestuck was lightning in a bottle, and that bottle broke halfway through. Plus, the fandom is far from blameless for what happened. Some of y'all were vicious. So why did Homestuck 2 fail, where I feel Petscop and FNF succeeded? All three had creators that encouraged audience creation and participation. For starters, the pressure that they faced. Homestuck Squared had to follow up on one of the largest Western webcomics ever created, and appease hundreds of thousands of fans. Petscop was an obscure analog horror series, and Friday Night Funkin' only became a full-scale project due to popular demand. The latter two teams also didn't seem to struggle with money, while the bottom line was constantly at the forefront of Homestuck team's concerns. But I think a deeper issue was the approach to fanon, explicitly how the community was allowed to blur the lines of canonicity. There's no one interpretation of Petscop's story. Modded characters can be considered just as important, even by the creators, as the base game plot in FNF. On the other hand, Homestuck Squared struggled to uplift fan creators, to show off other interpretations besides their own. The Toblerone wishes were changes made to canon, to objective parts of the original story. It wasn't an opportunity for anyone's interpretation to matter. It was the choices of a select few, deciding the truth for everyone else. And let's face it, not many people can just fly out to California to search for a candy bar in a cave. When Beyond Canon finally did return in 2023, one move that won me back was to partner with a popular fan comic, Vast Error, giving them full license to produce their story without fear of cease and desist. The official Twitter has been promoting more fan projects and promises to continue doing so. I think it's a good step in the right direction, if the goal of Beyond Canon is truly to hand the story over to the fans. People have always told stories, and others have listened in wonder, letting their imagination carry them to worlds beyond. I have a feeling that this tradition will continue on until the end of days. But with changes in technology and society, come a change in the way people create stories, as well as the way their audience engages with them. On the internet, fiction can be a mosaic, not just the original work, but the communities that form around it, the art it inspires. When you think of something like Jujutsu Kaisen, the chapters and episodes are only part of the experience. The edits, the brain rot, a community on the edge of its seat throughout its fights, spending every week arguing and hoping that something impossible will come to pass. Copyright law and canon create firm rules about who is allowed to tell a story. Anything else is irrelevant at best and illegal at worst. But within the realm of fandom, it's easy to forget that sometimes. And with authors now increasingly aware of the community around them, we're seeing an era of storytelling where the audience can influence the plot. It's not brand new, as popularity has often driven decisions behind long-running works. But I think the modern boom of fandom culture has taken it to new heights, truly blurred the lines of canonicity, to where it's not just a nod and a wink anymore. I'm excited to see where the examples I've listed go from here, and I wish both the creators and their fan bases the very best. Who knows if this idea of post-canon will take, but I've got my fingers crossed. And to the members of the original team behind Homestuck Squared, wherever you are, I hope that you're doing well, and I thank you for the foundation that you built. If anyone on the old or new team would like to reach out to me for a follow-up, I would be happy to collaborate on another video. Thank you all so much for watching. Can you believe this was originally going to be a 15-minute video? At least, I thought it was going to be while writing it. But over the course of development, this gradually turned into one of my biggest projects yet. Archie Sonic may have been harder, but at this point I'm not sure. It's been a while. Regardless, it was a blast to make, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions of other media that subverts canon. Also, feel free to leave a like, and maybe even subscribe if you want to see other stuff like this. Until next time, I love you, bye!